Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget, we continue to broadcast every weekend, 7 to 8 in the morning, Saturday and Sunday, here through Grupo Imagen. So it's the end of the year. It's as of course we continue to analyze uh, all these uh, all these political reforms, constitutional reforms, very important structural changes in Mexico's um, political system, checks and balances, and judicial system. Um, it's interesting to note that perhaps because the transition was between uh, two politicians from the same party, in this case Morena, from Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador to Claudia Sheinbaum, clearly, or at least we believe they have both the same vision of what Mexico's future should look like. What we didn't do through this whole process is try to do a better job in analyzing what what went well and what went bad in terms of Mexico's economic future and social future under Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's regime. And I say that because we were just so preoccupied with all these reforms, even before Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador left power. He was continued to implement an important structural uh, change to Mexico's political system, which continues up until now. Although Claudia Sheinbaum was sworn in October 1st, the reforms and the changes continue, and it continues as we speak. But I don't think we've done a good job in trying to figure out what what happened throughout the last 6 years. Are Mexican citizens better off, worse off? Where have they improved? What were the successes of President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's regime, his vision? What happened with with these reforms? That's why I really appreciate today's guest, Sofia Ramirez. She heads a very interesting. I really admire this NGO or this organization. It's called Mexico Como Vamos, and it's basically an organization that just works with numbers, tries to figure out and using numbers. There's also some, policy analysis, but what this organization does is try to provide very specific numbers in terms of what is happening with Mexico's economy and with what's happening with Mexico's society. They published once again this report called Social Progress Index, and some of the results of this report are quite interesting. Some of them are surprising, some of them are not. And I just really appreciate today's guest, Sofia Ramirez. She's the director of Mexico Como Vamos. Sofia, welcome to the show. I really appreciate you joining us as this year's ending and as we start a new year with a lot of question marks as to what this 2025 is going to look like, considering, there's a new president in the United States. There is a lot of concern in terms of decisions being made from the United States, how it's going to impact Mexico. And of course, we have the first couple of months of a new president here in Mexico, who in many ways seems to be, or she seems to be, the continuity of Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's vision. Welcome to the show. I don't know, why don't we start with what would you like to highlight on this social progress index?
Thank you very much for having me, Ana Maria. I really love your show. I've been a listener for years now. So I really appreciate being here. So I believe the first highlight I would like to put on the table for everybody who's listening to us is that even though we might seem to have the best outcome yet for social progress index score, which is pretty much 66 points out of 100. We need to see a little bit closer to state differences, region differences, of course, but also to the causes that are behind, this in such yeah, in some states it's an advancement, in some states it's more like a stagnation in social progress. So I believe one of the first messages I want to put on the table is Mexican families subsidize the state's role in providing services that enable access to fundamental rights, such as health and education. And this is important because usually people don't mind paying out of the pocket for, I don't know, spending such as an aspirin or going to the doctor in the first place. But if you think about bigger problems regarding the health of somebody in the family, this might, be a terrific, not a terrific, a terrible incident for the finances of that family, of that home. And of course, this might mean that the well-being of that whole family is going to decline over the time because money is a way to access some of these services, but it shouldn't be the only access, especially in issues such as health. And the second issue I want to put on the table, which is also very important, is that we might have been talking about if nearshoring is real or not, and whether new investment FDI is coming, or if greenfield investment is actually landing in some of the areas of the country. But we haven't thought really about how this impacts the communities. And we've been also finding out year after year after year, whenever we calculate the social progress index, that social well-being is very linked to new investment and, of course, the integration of the supply chains to the north. And by north, I don't mean just, the northern states of Mexico, but also Canada and the US. And this is pretty important because it's a virtuous cycle. Those states with a high level of social progress, they attract a lot of the FDI greenfield investments. And those states in the southeastern Mexico, which start with a low social progress index, with a low quality of life in several aspects, those are the states that are not attracting this FDI. And this is, a vicious cycle for those states. So those are the main, I don't know, like topics I think are very important in this social progress index edition.
Well, let me ask you this, because clearly one of former President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador's priorities were to assure, or at least to assure that in the long run, southern part of Mexico had the sufficient resources and at least incentives to grow. I mean, the amount, when you think about how the major infrastructure projects all went down to southern Mexico. How he tried to attract important foreign investment to southern Mexico, including Elon Musk's famous big company or whatever he was going to install in Nuevo León, which is not apparently is not on the table anymore. But yeah,
And
at
that was
one
the
point he was
Gigafactory.
it was a gigafactory. He was trying to make sure it went down to and was installed in some place in southern Mexico, or he tried to pressure Elon Musk. I mean, his focus was southern Mexico. Um, did it? Is there any indication that there will be some social advances for those Mexicans who live in the southern part of the country based on all these projects that Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador sponsored and financed, the government financed? Um, is there going to be an impact on the population, or was it just a short-term impact in terms of employment and and other, maybe, improving some services because you have because of these infrastructure projects? But once they stop building it, or they're not going to be that's not too sure they're going to be financially viable. I mean, will these just be big white elephants just kind of sitting in the middle of nowhere
I hope
with
not.
very little with very little impact? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. What we can tell regarding the data that are, available for everybody to consult in our webpage in mexicocomobamos.com, .mx, sorry, mexicocomobamos.mx, is that on the one hand, we see that there was a lot of money uh, spent within the southeast, of course, but the situation of Tabasco, I want to elaborate a little bit more on that one because it's like the refinery which was built for the last administration by the last administration for several years from 2019 to 2024 pretty much, and there was
Right.
a huge amount of money that was invested in that refinery. So the
Mhm.
problem is we are losing money as a country in refining oil. That's the first one.
That's the
The
bottom
second,
line.
yeah, the second one is that, of course, Tabasco saw a hike in formal employment, and therefore Tabasco saw also an increase and improving in GDP per capita, for example. That kind of measurements, of course, Tabasco was jumping into getting, into higher leagues.
Mhm.
But nonetheless, Tabasco is one of those examples in which you see that the higher GDP per capita is not necessarily directly converted into higher standard of living. So what we saw there is that there was of course, a lot of money invested, and therefore there was a
Mhm.
lot of formal employment, and therefore families had money in their pockets. But after a short period of time, and already by 2024, we see a lot of the formal employment is being lost because the
Mhm.
construction of the refinery is done. But on the other hand, we see that Tabasco is still struggling with, providing more of a basic social services that allow people to have a better quality of life in a broader sense. So therefore, we are investing public money in a refinery that is probably better equipped than some other refineries across the country. But that doesn't mean that Pemex is still being um, good at refining oil. So
Right.
therefore, we're investing probably in the wrong industries. But on the other hand, you asked, for example, regarding this tren interoceánico, this
Okay, that's a
one
good
that
one.
that
Mhm.
goes from Oaxaca to Veracruz, no, through the Istmo de Tehuantepec. Um, that is basic infrastructure that I believe is very good and very useful in
Mhm.
terms of providing social progress in time. But we're not going to see, any revenues in the short term, and we
Mhm.
also don't see any announcement of new FDI in the southeast. And this means that it should be something very important for this new administration. The one, as you said, is conceiving itself as a continuity of the last administration. And
Mhm.
if we see a little bit closer, for example, into the budget for next year, the public budget, we see there is not much money in terms of those priority investment programs. There is only about 190 million pesos, which is not much. But still, this might give us a little bit of light of where like the highlights for the next government or for this starting
Mhm.
government for the next year. And we see the Tren Interoceánico is just getting like 13% of this budget of priority investment programs. So I believe we should look a little bit closer into that because this was one of not too many good ideas of public spending last
Mhm.
administration. And we also see that the Southeast not only lacks public infrastructure, but also logistics. And if we
Mhm.
don't have the enough logistics, nearshoring or any type of shoring or any type of industrial interaction, and therefore, economic growth is not coming to the southeast.
Mhm.
So this is very interesting because, of course, what we see during this series of time we analyzed the social progress, which is 2015 to 2023, we don't see that the five states at the bottom of the list change their position within time, and in
Mhm.
2023 they occupy pretty much the same spots at the very end of the list, and I'm talking
Mhm.
specifically about Tabasco, Veracruz, Chiapas, Oaxaca, and Guerrero in that order. And again, Tabasco, which was one of the states that got more money in terms of their own GDP,
Mhm.
is still at the bottom of the list, and
Mhm.
that seems to be a little bit intuitive kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Joining us today is Sofia Ramirez. She's the director of Mexico Como Vamos. We are talking about their social progress index and some of the conclusions based on numbers that you all crunch together and compare year by year. You say at the beginning of the show or at the beginning of this interview, you talked about how there has been some advances in terms of Mexico's improvements in socially and in the social realm and these social programs that which has taken Mexico at least according to this index, from 66%, I believe, to 100%. Is that right? I mean, I'm
No,
trying to
no,
understand
yeah,
that there has been some improvements, it
yeah.
appears, based on these numbers. Where has there been improvements?
Yeah, first of all, it's the scale goes from 0 to 100,
Hmm.
and in 2015 we were at 60 points out of 100,
Hmm.
and in 2023 we are already by 66 points out of
Okay.
100. So
Okay.
it's not a percentage, but I know it aligns a little bit with the idea
Right.
of out of
Right.
100. But
Right.
nonetheless, we're still, like lagging a little bit behind in terms of like we have this big strong economic healthy north of the country with a lot
Hmm.
of investment and a lot of infrastructure, and of course there, I mean, also in those very those states in a better shape than the rest of the country, there are some of the issues that might be important to look at. For example, in Nuevo León, the presence of organized crime is one of those variables that pull down the advancement for the state. Same thing, for example, for Mexico City. Mexico City is scoring at the highest level of social progress within the 2023 edition. But nonetheless, we see that we have some of the issues regarding security holding the entity back. Some other states, such as Colima had never been worse. And this is part, of course, that they are not only lacking public safety, but they are seeing, like those rates of crime are the highest. And of course, it has an impact in the economic life of the state, and therefore it has also an economic impact in the pockets of the people that provide themselves those basic services such as education and healthcare. So you can't say that we all have the same problems, but there are also very specific problems that might be interesting highlighting. For example, teen pregnancy. Pregnancy is one of those variables that indicate that there is a little bit of a bigger problem in terms of
Right.
social mobility for those
Hmm.
women. And teen pregnancy is quite high, for example, in Chihuahua, for different reasons than in the southeast. But Chihuahua is pretty much ranking at the same levels of teen pregnancy as the southeast, because
Hmm.
in the southeast there is no return to the input that you do in or you put into your education, for example.
Hmm.
So there
Hmm.
is no education return that allows people to be encouraged to study more, and if they
Right.
study more, they're still not going to get a better job, and probably they're not going to get better income. So people who study more in the southeast part of the country, they just migrate to some other place within Mexico or outside Mexico. But in Chihuahua, teen pregnancy is more of a problem related to NAFTA. And I'm talking about NAFTA and not USMCA because it's actually an older problem. So those kind of issues, which are pretty much the same in different parts of the country, but they are not geographically put at the same region or within the same region. Those are the issues that might be worth talking about. Other significant topic I want to address is, for example, the percentage of youth people that don't work and don't study.
Study. Hmm.
Those are people also that are going to be not able to have any social mobility for life. And if you look into the map, you see Zacatecas, which is pretty much in the northern part of the country, has
Mm-hmm.
more or less the same levels of younger people that don't work and don't study as the southeast. So again, you may see that the index shows, you know, what an average looks the state like,
Mm-hmm.
but you need to look into those variables that are hurting people within each state, and therefore this is a very useful tool for policymakers, but also for local investors, and also, you know, like all those groups of enterprises or entrepreneurs who want to go and build an ecosystem within the entities. And last but not least, I would like to say also that we have been calculating with the Social Progress Imperative, which is another NGO in the States, how the social progress looks like at the US-Mexico region as a whole.
Right.
We don't
Mm-hmm.
have any data for Canada, so therefore we just have, you know, the States and Mexico. And if you see the southern states of the US, you may see that the quality of life measured through the Social Progress Index is pretty much the same as the one we have in the northern part of the country, but also in both of our peninsula, in the Baja California and in the Yucatan Peninsula, and of course in the center, which is Mexico City, Querétaro, Estado de Mexico, and so on. So this social progress is or has a huge interaction with the economic variables, specifically with trade. And in this very moment, when we are talking about how the review in 2026 of the USMCA would look like, we
Mm-hmm.
should take into account, because we're not talking only about the big firms who will lose money or who will have to pay any tariff or whatever. We are talking on the US side about the consumer, the average consumer, who's going
Mm-hmm.
to be hurt if
Mm-hmm.
tariffs are putting into place. But on
Mm-hmm.
the Mexican side, we are talking about not trying to be a hard negotiator, but more of a smart one. We need to take into account that well being in our country has been built for the last 40 years around this trade openness. And
Right.
through this instrument, like the Social Progress Index, we can see it
Mm-hmm.
graphically.
Mm. You know, it's so interesting how you're highlighting the the importance of trying to be smart, at least this upcoming year, because the renegotiation of or the reevaluation, we don't know yet, of the USMC in 2026 is going to go through all these confrontations that will happen in 2025, and threats by Donald Trump and his new team in the White House of whether, you know, there's going to be, you know, tariffs, um, what Mexico is going to do in regards to migration, and of course organized crime. So it's kind of all blending in into this big mash of problems that the United States has been expressing concerns throughout the years. But both governments, the Mexican government, the U.S. government, at least had tried to separate the trade issues from the migration
Security to,
and
yeah,
the
agenda.
security issues, and they had been relatively successful during NAFTA era, and somewhat during the first years of the USMCA. So my question is this going to be is this now is the security issues going to be finally are going to end up affecting the ability of Mexico to continue exporting or having a normal trade relationship with the United States? You know what I mean? Because nobody talks about some parts of Mexico, at least, you know, towards the end of 2024, they're literally in a warlike situation. I mean, you know, that be due to the numbers. In southern Mexico, the security situation has deteriorated for different reasons. But it seems that the security issue had not been a problem in terms of maintaining a regular trade relationship with the United States. Do you think
Yeah.
this will now happen, unfortunately, or both countries are going to be able to keep those problems separate?
Well, I believe, as you were very precise into highlighting this. Um, those traffic lanes that we knew before during the NAFTA area, that we talked about migration, security, of course, trade, and diplomatic relationships, are not going to be there anymore. There is this big chunk of relationship that takes
Mm-hmm.
everything into account, and we have to negotiate with that one. So this means, on the one hand, Mexico has to have very enthusiastic, but also very professional in those all those areas: migration,
Mm-hmm.
security, trade, economics, and so on. Within the teams that are going to be negotiating the review in 2026, that, as you also stated, is going to start by January 2025. As soon as Donald Trump arrives to the White House, of course, we're going to see whether he is going to put tariffs on us or not. What I'm
Mm-hmm.
very sure is they're going to know, or they're going to see, that tariffs are not going to be sustainable, and therefore, for the American interests, I mean, and therefore, I would expect that they would more that they would go more into looking into the migration area.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have us in a lot of uncertainty, which is bad for the economy, for the markets,
Mm-hmm.
for investment, for everybody. Because
Mm-hmm.
under uncertainty, you cannot take the same
Right.
amount of decisions you would take, or
Mm-hmm.
the size of the decisions you take is going to be, smaller chunks of decisions instead of a big investment
Mm-hmm.
decision kind of thing. So I believe what is going to happen is we need, as Mexicans, to be ready to have this bigger team of negotiators in all those issues together. But on the other hand, we need to be very dynamic and flexible. But
Mm-hmm.
of course, we need to take into account that we're seeing here a different combination of negotiators, both in the Mexican and the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
side. I would expect more to see. I don't know, more of a demand to control migration and to interact in security issues. I
Mm-hmm.
believe, as you already said, that until now, the public safety in Mexico was added more as a cost to the equation of those big enterprises,
Right.
international firms, and so on. But at the local level, since more and more smaller or medium-sized firms are being integrated into the supply chains, those are firms that are being more harmed by, public
Right.
safety issues and organized
Mm-hmm.
crime and so on. So, of course, it is a bigger issue right now for Mexicans and for investors, how security is going to end up. And I
Mm-hmm.
believe this government is making a big mistake in terms of just assigning half of a percentage point of the GDP into the budget of public spending within security and public safety for next year.
Mm-hmm.
When you see, in comparison, that we are spending almost 4 points out of 100, of course, of the GDP into like interest paying. Of course, we cannot stop paying interests, but we need
Right.
to
Right.
focus on what's important. And public safety
Mm-hmm.
seems to me to be one of the most important issues if we want to keep having this integration slash social progress effect
Mm-hmm.
in the future for
With
our locals.
see, let me and I really appreciate you joining us today, Sofia Ramirez. She heads Mexico Como Vamos. This is my last question, and then I hope we will have the opportunity to continue talking about this issue next this 2025. Um, I am always mystified by the fact that you have this extraordinary amount of violence in Mexico. Warnings by the US government to its nationals not to travel to certain parts of Mexico, not to be careful, not literally not to travel. Not only the United States but other countries around the world. You have now Canada expressing concern about Mexico, about the China in terms of the Chinese influence in this country, in Mexico's economy, but also starting to talk about the security issues, especially in the case of the Canadians. Their minds have been affected by this issue. They have warnings for Canadian nationals also traveling certain parts of the country. It has always mystified me how this horrendous security situation in Mexico has not had a major impact on on Mexico, on investors seeing Mexico as a good place to invest. Um, do you think we've it's hit the tipping point that the security issue will now be a concern, not only in terms of the White House rhetoric or uh, you have to stop migration, you have to stop organized crime, you have to stop fentanyl coming into the United States. But now, do you think the investment community, the business community, will now have to reconsider their investments in Mexico because of the security situation, or you think Mexico could this could go on a little longer?
Um,
It's
I
hard.
think,
It's
yeah, it's a difficult question
question,
since,
yeah,
yeah, since you already said, I mean, we've been talking about those warnings of not traveling to Mexico for the last like 20 years or something.
right,
Nonetheless, people keep coming and keep up investing. I mean,
right,
almost half of our FDI is comes from North America, from Canada and the
right.
US altogether. So I believe this is something I wanted to say in my previous intervention, which is we see on the one hand that most of our exports, 65% of what we export, goes through road. And of course, roads are that place which allow a lot of the robbing and, also yeah, just
Carjacking,
yeah,
kidnapping,
everything that has to do with
everything goes
security.
wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
they're stealing these big,
yeah,
trucks with all the goods in it. Yeah. Hmm.
but also the mining, as you stated, like Newmont company was recently robbed, and they found the drivers, which is good, and they found the trucks, but they didn't find the what was in there, like the
Product, yeah.
minerals. So I mean, this is terrible news for Mexico, of course. It was bad news 20 years ago. It is bad news now.
Hmm.
Um, for the last 20 years, what I believe has been happening is that the bigger transnational companies were just measuring how much more would it cost in terms of, okay, I get robbed and then I need to do it again and I'm having a loss and that's
Hmm.
okay. And it still make meets end and it's business
Hmm.
for us. But now I believe, and this is what I wanted to say out loud. If we want to have not only investment that comes, extracts, and takes the money away,
Hmm.
and in good times it comes back and invests again. If we want the investment to stay here and
Right.
to elevate the quality of life of our communities, of course we need to figure out how to have better public safety for everybody.
Hmm.
Because if you're
Hmm.
Tesla, okay, Tesla is a bad example. If you are any automobile industry and come to Mexico, of course you're going to hire at some point locals, and those hires probably are not going to be from that region because you go and put a factory where there are of course roads and trains and supply chains, but probably you're going to have to get some human capital from the bigger cities of the country. If you
Hmm.
want those people to move into that other place where the plant is being constructed, of course you need to provide schooling, housing, and public safety. And those are major issues that are probably not really taken into account until now, or had not been taken into account until now. Because now, when we see that the integration is real, we need to figure out how to compensate the quality of life of the people that
Hmm.
are losing their quality of life within, the bigger, safer cities, and they're moving into the cities that are smaller in size but closer to the plants.
Hmm.
Um, I think we're there, and I think it is going to start hurting the pace on how we're seeing private investment,
Hmm.
local and foreign. So I believe, and this is important, that the government should be putting more attention, more money, more resources, and of course asking for help when needed from the private sector, but also from the states, from the US, that is always very keen on helping on security issues, providing equipment, providing training and so on, exchange of information, intelligence information. Those are the issues that are really useful. And for us to get to those resources, we need to have a proper diplomatic relationship with our neighbors, because of course they are our biggest buyers and we are their biggest suppliers. But this also means we need to realize that the integration is real and it's multi-level, and we need to incorporate those other efforts into having the investments working for everybody, for all parts, not only for the investors, but also for the cities that are hosting that investment. And I believe, as you said, security is one of those hot topics that need to be addressed, probably in a more vocal sense and
Well,
probably in a more diplomatic sense.
well, and of course, we have to remind everybody we are supposed to have the World Cup in 2026. And if security is not an issue for the World Cup, I don't know what it's going to be. Anyway, I really, really appreciate you joining us. Sofia Ramirez, she is the director of Mexico Como Vamos. Thank you so much for joining us once again. It's great to see you, and I really appreciate you being here with us in the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Have a
Thank you.
wonderful day. Bye.
Bye. We're going to go to a commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening and